This happened when I was in high school. One day my dad told me that he thought my neighbor was missing. All the mail outside his house was piled up. That wasn't like him, and he was a very neat and tidy person. My dad knocked on his door a few times, but he never answered. He was missing. He left no note at home, and he wasn't acting strangely or anything. It was totally out of the blue. 3 days later, a missing person report was filed. His extended family asked locals to help join the search for our missing neighbor. I joined the search with my grandpa. We both weren't working, so we were free. We met at the assigned meeting place and listened to the instructions of the group leader ahead of starting the search. I was very aware that I was in an adult world. My grandpa did say that they needed me to join the search because I was young. I knew this to be true, as most of the people in the search group were as old as my grandpa, if not older. We were split into teams. My grandpa and I joined the deep woods and mountain search. I was not accustomed to hiking at that age. I don't even like hiking nowadays. And come to think of it, I think that this experience is to blame for that. I just followed along and tried to keep up with my grandpa and the group. Since I was a young high school student, I could rely on my strength and energy levels. After a while, we split our group into even smaller groups. My grandpa knew the mountains we lived close to really well. He often went out into the mountainous woods searching for wild vegetables to harvest. So my grandpa said that me and him would head into the deepest part of the woods. I followed Grandpa, and we climbed up and down and all over the place. We didn't find anything. I looked at my watch and it was coming up to noon. According to the instructions of the group leader, we were all to meet while having lunch to exchange information and then set off again. I couldn't see my grandpa. He must have gone off ahead. So I turned around and then called out in the general direction I thought he went off in. Before I could finish calling the word Grandpa, my call turned into an involuntary scream. I didn't ever dream that I would be the one to find my missing neighbor. He hung himself. There was a cloud of flies swarming around the body. There was a light breeze that day, and the body swayed from side to side. I heard the creak of the rope against the tree limb. Hearing my scream, my grandpa came rushing over to me, but he was coming from the opposite side. The body was between us. I saw the look of pure horror on his face. He saw the same sight as I had, and he let out a shocked gasp. He just froze. I called out to him, but he was unresponsive. It was as if he was in a trance. His knees were shaking. I always thought that was a cliché, but I guess that it's true. I ran over to him. I had to go the long way around the body, as I didn't want to get anywhere near it. When I got close to him, I shook his shoulders. I wanted him to come back to his senses. It was so stressful for me. He slipped to one knee. I saw the sweat gathering on his brow and his face turning pale. He couldn't handle what he was seeing, and when I understood that, I knew that I needed to get him the hell out of there. I lifted him up onto my back like a piggyback ride and headed away from the body. Luckily, there was someone from one of the groups not too far away. I explained the situation and left my grandpa in their care. I had to go. I wanted to go home. The police came next. As I was the person who discovered the body, I was tasked with the duty of leading them to it. I knew that Grandpa wouldn't be able to do it, and as much as I didn't want to go back there, I knew I had to do it. I was asked by the police. It's not something I could have gotten out of, I guess. I climbed the mountain with the police officers. I hated every second of it. I showed them the tree, and they made me stay as they cut the body down. It made such a hollow thud as it hit the ground. Then they took me to the police station to be interviewed. I had to go through it again and again to their satisfaction. When I was released, my family wanted to know all about it. I couldn't do it anymore. I didn't sleep that night. I had pains in my legs, but that wasn't the cause of my lack of sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the neighbor's body swaying in the breeze. I ended up having insomnia for about a week. It didn't end there, though. I wanted to put it all behind me, but I couldn't yet. The owner of the mountain area came to our door with a request. He wanted me to cut down the tree that our neighbor hung from, as I was the person who discovered the body. I don't know if this is a thing elsewhere in Japan or even abroad, but I kind of understand it. It wouldn't be nice for the bereaved to do it, or someone who was scared of going to a place where someone chose to end it all. He offered to pay me to do it, and since I was a high school student, I didn't have many options to make money, so I went with him. I guess that he didn't want the tree to still stand on his property. Maybe his reason for wanting it cut down was superstitious, and maybe that's why he needed me to do it. With each step further into the woods, I felt closer and closer to all those feelings I felt when I discovered the body. Even though I was exhausted from cutting down a tree, I couldn't get to sleep that night. I didn't sleep well for many nights after that. It was about 2000 or 2001. My best friend and I were 12 to 13 years old. We lived in a small town in rural Minnesota, about 2,000 people. Out of our friend group, her and I were the only two that lived out in the country, so we understood the boredom that could ensue, but the fun things that would come out of it. Exploring the woods, running around in the cornfields, creating forts, exploring the abandoned houses on their property, other stuff like that. It was a really fun time for us. One day we decided to take our bikes and ride down some gravel roads. Our little brother tagged along. He was about 9 or 10 at the time. We were riding along, laughing, probably picking on our brother, when we see an old shack in one of the cornfields. The corn wasn't fully grown, so we weren't able to see most of it. We decided to explore it because, why not? I'm now 33, so bear with my memory. I don't remember much about the outside, but I do remember what I saw inside, and it still gives me the creeps to this day. We peered inside, and the first thing I noticed were the posters on the wall of the room. They were on every wall. There was a different person on every poster, and they looked angry. Some held firearms pointed right at you. Some were pointing their finger, and felt like they were pointing right at us with their eyes trained on us. In the center of the floor was a perfectly painted red circle. My friend and I remember a star in the middle, but her little brother just remembers the circle. As we're staring at this creepy scene, I feel like we're being watched, and not by the posters. I look to my right across the gravel road and into the cornfields across from us. Standing in the middle of the field is a man. He's just watching us. He's not waving his arms, not yelling at us, just watching. I alert my friends and we look at him together. I awkwardly wave and he continues to just stand there, doesn't wave back. We're sufficiently creeped out, so we jump on our bikes to get away. We're on gravel, which isn't easy to bike on, so it's taking us a while to get going. We bike away, and I repeatedly turn around to see if he's still there, and he's still watching us. He barely moved, and only turned his body slightly to angle in our direction to keep watching. I still can't get over how he just appeared in the middle of a field like that. Recently, I've been thinking of this, so my friend, her brother, and I started a group chat. We all shared what we remembered, and they basically said everything I did. What I didn't know was that they went back the next day, and everything was gone, even the paint on the floor. A week later, whoever owned it donated it to the fire department to be burned. I don't know what was going on in that shack. Some thoughts have been weird rituals, target practice for some militia guy, or just some weird creepy guy who has poor taste in decor. Whatever it was, it still weirds me out to this day. So I was reading a post and it triggered a memory that I'd completely forgotten about, and I decided to share it on here. For a bit of backstory, I used to live in a very small town that was predominantly safe for kids. It only had some drug issues. Anyways, my house was located in a small and upscale part of the town, which mainly housed families. There was a small pond with lots of green in the neighborhood that was about a 5-minute walk from my house. To get to the pond, you had to go down a grass hill. Neighborhood kids, including myself, would always go to that pond for hours to catch frogs, skip rocks, and whatnot. Okay, so now onto the story. On this particular day, it was raining and pretty cold, so there were no other kids at the pond. My best friend, her brother, and myself decided to head down to the pond for a bit. After about an hour, we see at the top of the hill a minivan pull up. We thought nothing of it, as there was a neighborhood mailbox at the top of this hill as well, and a lot of people stopped to get their mail. A man started to get out of the minivan, and I remember him being older, probably in his 60s. Another note, since we live in a small town, everyone knew everyone, or at least could recognize everyone. I remember thinking it was strange that I'd never seen this man before in the town or in the neighborhood. He got out and just stared at the three of us for what seemed like forever. All of a sudden, he yelled at us and said, "It's not safe down there. You kids better come up here." My best friend and her brother looked terrified, and I had this gut feeling that something wasn't right. We didn't say anything back, and he continued to repeat that phrase. "It's not safe down there. You kids better come up here. It's not safe down there. You kids better come up here." Our fight or flight reaction kicked in, and we all booked it up the other side of the hill, which was only about a few meters away from him and the minivan. As soon as he saw us running, he got into his minivan and started driving slowly behind us, literally following us until we reached my house. Luckily, my garage door was open, and my parents' two cars were parked inside. We hid behind one of my parents' cars and watched as he pulled to the side of my house and parked. My parents were inside, but obviously had no idea what was happening. He stayed parked in front of my house for a couple of minutes until my dad came outside to take out the trash and saw the three of us hiding. I guess the man saw my dad and drove away. But as soon as he left, we told my parents everything. Even until this day, my parents still think we were being overdramatic, and that it was a man that was genuinely concerned for our safety because of the weather. Nonetheless, we weren't allowed to go back to the pond anymore. I don't blame them for thinking this though, because the three of us tended to work things up a bit and be dramatic. But I knew from the way I had that strange feeling when I first saw him at the top of the hill that something was off. And to this day, I still believe he was planning something. So, man at the top of the pond, let's not meet. I wasn't actually asleep, but it was about 3 a.m. I was lying in bed and I heard some noises coming from downstairs. My brother had gone out drinking, and I assumed it was him coming home pissed. It sounded like he was struggling with the front door, so I thought I'd go and help him and laugh at him. As I walked down to the front door, I could see the shape of two people through the window, and one of them was trying to peek through the glass. Stupidly, I just went into full rage mode, ran up to the door and opened it, shouting, "Fuck off." There were two men standing there with screwdrivers that they'd been trying to get the door open with. Thankfully, they decided to run away. For some reason, I chased after one of them who got into a car. I couldn't think of anything to do, so I just kind of angrily pointed at him as he drove away. He was later arrested for other burglaries, and I also picked him out of a lineup, which made me feel better. Police are good sometimes. This happened in 2011. I'd just gotten out of a rough relationship a few months prior to this happening. My friends encouraged me to try dating again, so I caved in and made a profile on the website Plenty of Fish. I was surprised with how many messages I'd received within the first few hours. Most were just people saying hi or asking to hook up. I wasn't looking for a hookup, so I ignored those messages. After about a week, a guy roughly an hour away from me messaged me. He was cute, so I messaged him back. The conversation was pretty casual at first. He asked if I'd like to go for a coffee sometime. Not thinking anything of it, I said sure. This is where it started to get weird. He started to get pushy and asked when we could grab a coffee. I told him I didn't have my own car, so I'd have to borrow my mom's car to meet up with him. He offered to come pick me up, but I wasn't comfortable with the idea. The next message made my blood run cold. It read, "I'm sure your hometown isn't that big. If I knock on a few doors, someone would be able to tell me where you lived." "Are you crazy?" I replied. "I'm sorry, but that's kind of creepy." This just pissed him off. He messaged me multiple times after this. They said, "You know I have a gun. I could shoot you and make you disappear. No one would look for you. You're nothing but a dirty slut. I could kill you. I'll throw you down a well, and no one will ever find you." I was really scared at this point, so I asked him to please leave me alone. He replied with the following: "I know where your hometown is. It's not a big town. I can find you." At this point, I'd had enough and I blocked him. I reported his account to Plenty of Fish and deleted my account. I was really on edge for the next few weeks after the fact. I was afraid he was actually going to come look for me. My friend lived in a really rural, small country town, and I'd come to spend the summer with her at her grandparents' house. We were both 13 at the time, and thought it'd be a good idea to sneak out and walk around the town, maybe stop by the park. As we were walking down this one road, about 30 minutes after we left the house, we noticed somebody following us, wearing all black with a hoodie. We both got pretty creeped out and quickly rounded a corner before hiding in the dark of some bushes. After the guy passed us and we waited about another 30 minutes, we decided we should probably head back to our house. So we ran there. Once we got back inside, we couldn't really go to sleep, so we did an all-nighter. The next morning, we see on the news that a woman was stabbed, assaulted, and killed on the exact road we'd been on that night. And we couldn't help but wonder if the attacker was the man who'd been following us. Safe to say, we didn't sneak out again after that. I was 17 when this happened. I had an early morning shift in a restaurant, and I used to get the bus there. When I got to my bus stop, someone was already there. That was strange because it was so early in the morning. I started to walk to my workplace, just to notice that the man started following me. Seeing the man following me got me scared and I started to run. There was so much off with the man. The whole time he looked at the ground, but also started to run when he saw me running. I quickly ran to the back doors and saw him coming in the same direction. When I closed the doors, he was just a couple of meters away from me, and I saw that he tried to open the door that thankfully locked after I entered. When I was pacing inside the restaurant, my coworkers came to me and said that someone is trying all the windows to get in. We called the cops, and they later told us that the man was carrying a tiny saw with him. Sometimes I think what he would have done if he had been quicker than me. I work in a morgue, so as you can imagine, weird things happen every so often, but not as often as you might think. My very first day, a casket flew out of its shelf and landed a good 7 feet away or so. My coworker just laughed it off and said stuff like that happens every once in a while. Then nothing happened for about a month. I asked around and brought it up in a casual conversation, and turns out everyone that works there actually had a paranormal story, but only really on their first day. One day, I went on a call to pick up a fetus, but by procedure, we don't use cots. We put them in what looks like a flexible overnight bag. So I picked him up from the hospital, and I put the straps around my shoulder and the center over my stomach. Everything went smoothly. Once I take him out of the car, I put it over my stomach again, and I walk into the door of our facility, and just as I'm about to put him down, I feel this massive heating sensation over my stomach, like an internal heat, and it absolutely shocked me. It wasn't just the heat that shocked me, but I felt so much more. I have no idea how to explain it, but I just know that it was from the unborn baby. Our laundry room and break room share the same wall, so every day I'd hear a loud bang come from the laundry room. Of course I'm thinking that somebody is slamming the cabinet doors a bit too hard, until one busy day, and everybody was out on calls, and I was the only person there. I heard that loud slamming again, and I think, wait, maybe there's something more to this. So I try to go to the laundry room and open a couple of cabinets to see if whatever it is will slam it again. I took before pictures, but nothing ended up happening. So after that, I've been more attentive to what's going on in there. I'll take pictures every so often, but I never come up with anything. I feel like maybe a spirit got sort of trapped in the morgue, and I'm wondering if it's a lost spirit, or if it's trying to get our attention for some reason. I'm not sure where you guys stand on helping out these entities, but I would love to try and lead them back to their family, or at least get a picture or video of it. For some last little notes, my boss and I heard a baby cry, voices that would call out a coworker's name, and always little things misplaced. I've only been working for about 3 to 4 months, so hopefully I can gather more stories. In high school, I was babysitting for a single mom and her 2 kids. It was the middle of winter, and when I arrived, it was already pitch black out. It was around 6 p.m. She lived in a duplex. While I was standing there in the living room with her and her girls, talking about how the rest of the night would go, a little boy in full snow gear came in through her front door, stomped through the living room past us, and headed down the stairs to the basement. The mother never even looked at him or stopped talking. The girls didn't make any acknowledgement that they saw him. I was really weirded out, but I was also an extremely introverted teenager, so I didn't ask the mom what was up. Once the mother left, I asked the girls who the little boy was that came in, and they both had no idea what I was talking about. So I got brave and grabbed a broom and headed downstairs. It was a small, unfinished basement, one single room with no closets or anything. No one was down there, and the little boy definitely had not come back upstairs in that time. It was so weird, and the only time I truly believed I experienced something paranormal. I usually scoff at ghost stories. So I was on the way home from Arby's with a mint chocolate shake. I zoned out for a second and almost didn't notice his car. I tried just letting him through, but he insisted I go on ahead. I didn't think much of it and just continued on walking. He drove on ahead and parked his car near some apartments. He had on a black polo shirt, so I assumed he was just dropping something off for a job or something. As I kept walking, he approached me and offered me a $20 bill. I asked why, but I couldn't understand what he said in response. I refused since I know what's best for me. However, that didn't deter him. He grabbed my waist and I stepped to the side. He then started pulling me towards his car. I bit his hand so he couldn't silence me and made sure to scream as loud as possible to try and attract any bystanders if I could. He managed to get me into his car, and just before he could close it, I stuck my foot through the door to keep it open. I then got out and made myself go limp, since adding dead weight without warning creates sudden resistance and makes it harder for anyone to grasp you. Due to this quick thinking, I was able to get away unharmed. I quickly booked it and got on the phone with my mom once I was at a safe distance. I made sure to stay on the phone until I got back. After that, I'd taken some time to calm down and waited for the cops to get there to get my statement. The officer ended up praising my quick thinking, telling me that I'd luckily done everything right in this situation. Please guys, take self-defense seriously. I only ever had a week-long course, and just that alone had managed to save my life. I didn't remember too much from my self-defense course, and only used the basic techniques that I remembered, which was making noise, dropping my weight, and checking behind me. Any other actions I'd taken were a result of logic and quick thinking. Chances are, if I'd gotten myself more defense training, it likely wouldn't have been as close of a call as it was. Also, never accept money from strangers. While there are good Samaritans, there's also people who don't have your best interest in mind. If you do think they have good intentions, make sure to double check by asking why they're offering you money. If you don't get a good, legitimate reason, then make sure you refuse. If you refuse and they still persist, then get away immediately. When I lived in Jefferson Park in Chicago, I would take the Blue Line home from work at night and cut through the park on my way back to my apartment. One night, After I just got off an 11-hour shift, I was walking through the park like usual towards Lawrence Avenue. Usually I'm the only one there, or there's another commuter walking home with me. This time, as I'm walking through alone, this guy walks out of the shadows next to this community center in the park and is now walking 15 meters behind me. No big deal. I figured he just had to go piss in the bushes, which I had done on many occasions after a night of drinking. So, I'm walking along, and I realize this guy is now about 5 meters behind me. But he's not trying to pass me. He's matching my pace. At this point, I'm on Lawrence, and I'm still thinking he's probably just walking home too. I go to cross the street a couple of blocks away, and when I turn to see if there's a car coming, I see he's even closer to me. Like really close. Weird. He crosses with me and he starts walking faster to keep up as I speed up my pace. Now, this is really weird. I cross the street again at a random part of the street to see if he follows. He does. I cross the street again. He follows again. He's definitely following me. So as I'm nearing my apartment, I'm realizing I don't want this guy to know where I live. So I stop, pull out my knife, and turn around. We make eye contact for what felt like 5 minutes, but it was probably only 25 seconds. Neither of us say a word. He doesn't look scared, but he looks surprised. I turn back around and keep walking. He turns left at the very next intersection. To this day, I don't know if I saved myself from a mugging by showing this guy I was ready to fight, or if I just scared the shit out of some poor bastard just trying to get home. Better safe than sorry, I guess. This happened shortly after bars were reopening after the pandemic lockdowns. I went to a dive bar near 82nd Avenue in Portland, Oregon, a real shithole. But they were one of the only bars that had karaoke that early after lockdowns eased. I sang my song and walked over to the bar for a drink. I'm chatting with the bartender when a man approaches me. I'm a large man, 6'2" and a little over 200 pounds. But this guy dwarfed me. He was probably 6'6" and easily 280 pounds or more. He's probably 30 to 35 years old, huge and muscular. He was wearing a face mask. Very common, but he was the only one at the bar doing it. He'd been wearing this mask so long that it was dirty, and the part of the mask in front of his mouth was visibly wet from his saliva and breath. It was pretty gross. He had very cold, dead eyes. He asked me if I lifted weights. I did, and he questioned me about how much I could lift in my bench, squat, and whatever. He came off as socially awkward immediately, but no big deal. He then bragged about how much he could lift. He could bench something like 350 pounds, he said, and at one point he even did a bodybuilding pose, flexing his arms to his sides and encouraging me to squeeze them. I played along and did. He seemed weird, possibly on the spectrum. But shitty dive bars are filled with weird people, so I indulged him and let him talk. The conversation continued, and he said more and more strange things, which I just listened to non-judgmentally. He told me he used to be a professional baseball player. He told me how he used to be a police officer. He told me about his drinking habit, and how he drank 25 beers that day. At this point, I feel like the guy is very strange, probably completely full of shit, and even makes me a little uncomfortable. But I maintained a calm demeanor because I was also curious what else he had to say. That's when he shifted to talking about women. He said he'd noticed how I talked with a female bartender, how we had a nice rapport. He asked me about how to talk to women, what kinds of things to talk about, and then came the first real red flag when he said, "But how do you get them to trust you?" I tried to keep a straight, non-judgmental face, though, at this rather alarming question. At this point, I didn't think he was dangerous, but I didn't feel good about teaching someone how to behave to gain someone's trust. But I also felt like I needed to keep him talking. So I just said generic things about being honest and caring, as opposed to specific things to do or say. Then it gets weirder. He asks me if I like anal sex. I said, truthfully, I didn't know, as at that point I'd never tried it. He tells me he likes it. A lot. It's his preferred kind of sex. Then he continued, saying he likes to go to the mall to pick up young women. 18 or 19, he said. He said he'd buy them things and then try to get them back to his truck, where he'd do that with them. He was implying it was consensual, but I had doubts. At this point, I'm convinced I'm likely talking with a sociopath and someone who wouldn't take no for an answer. Alarm bells are going off like crazy, but I want to get him to admit to a crime so I can try and tell an authority something substantive. Then came the final straw that makes me lose my cool. He looks at me and slowly says, "I've done bad things." He looks down. I've done some really bad things. I'm freaking out inside, but I want him to tell me. I ask him as cool and non-judgmentally as possible, what kind of bad things? But my body language must have communicated that I was neither cool nor non-judgmental, and he shut me down. The conversation ended shortly after. I went home that night and looked up the name he gave me. Surely a former baseball player or police officer would have some kind of online record, but nothing came up. I'll never forget that encounter and regret not figuring out a way to ID him and failing to keep my cool enough to get him to admit to a crime. I wonder if he's still out there luring young women to his truck. Everyone, be safe out there. I don't even know where to start. I guess I'll just write it all in chronological order from when I heard other people's stories and then experienced whatever it was for myself. To preface this, I should mention that all of this took place back home on my reservation. Another thing I should mention is that, on the res, traditional beliefs and legends of the paranormal are still a big part of our community. The attitude of most people towards the paranormal is one of assurance. To us, the paranormal is a regular part of life. We believe in a spirit world, and we believe that sometimes these beings can cross over into our world and maybe even live among us. When I tell paranormal stories to my non-native friends, they're always in such disbelief that things like this have actually happened, and how casually I talk about it, but it's only because it's been so normalized for me. Where they have absolutely no paranormal experiences, I have a bunch, and most of everyone I know on the res has even more than I do. I don't really care to explain it. Maybe we're all crazy from drinking our toxic tap water. I don't know. Anyway, here's the story. This all happened in the fall of 2011. I was 16 years old. I was living in a nearby city with my mom so that I could get a better education than the one I could get back home. But we'd go back every single weekend to see my dad and little brother. One Friday, during the drive back home, I got a text from a friend of mine. She told me about a party that was happening that night and asked me when I'd be home so they could pick me up. I gave her a time, and that was that. We get home, and as soon as we stepped inside the house, we see my dad and my cousin sitting at the kitchen table drinking some beers. They're both cops on the res, so usually, beers with his partner on a Friday evening means that they've had a particularly tough week at work. Typically, the toughest cases to deal with are the child abuse ones, so a part of me felt sad immediately that something bad had happened. They both looked tired and drained, but they're happy to see us. We say our greetings, catch up a bit, and my dad asks me if I have plans. I tell him about the party and where it'll be, and he and our cousins share a weird look. "Why are you guys making that face? Did something happen?" I asked. "I don't know. Should we tell her?" my cousin said, looking at my dad. He laughed, and they decided that I should probably know what's been going on, since I'd be going to a cottage pretty deep in the woods later that evening. They start with the first strange call they got on Monday night. An older woman called, saying that people were outside of her house, knocking on all of her windows. She said she couldn't see anybody, but there must have been at least 3 people, judging by all the different locations of the knocking. They arrived at the woman's home, inspected all around the house, even checked the woods, but nothing came up. They tell her it's probably just some teenagers playing tricks on her, and that there isn't much else they can do besides patrol around the area in case they come back. On Wednesday night, the same woman called again with the same problem. It had rained that day, and there was mud all around this woman's home, so they figured that at the very least, they'd find footprints, but they couldn't find a thing. This is when they started feeling like something was off, because one of the windows where the woman was adamant about there being knocking was completely impossible to get to without stepping through this huge mud puddle. This is when they started to think that the woman was lying, but they just told her the same thing they told her a few nights prior. By Thursday night, everyone on the res had been talking about these strange experiences. It turns out, this woman wasn't the only one experiencing the knocking. She was just the only one to call the police. I mean, all of this was taking place on a res, so it wasn't long before people were linking it to supernatural causes. My dad was still sure it was just a bunch of teenagers pranking people, but then they got another call from the same woman for the same reason. They rushed over and were met with the same situation, except this time, the neighbor walked over looking pale as a ghost. He says, "Is this about the knocking?" They notice he's a little shaky. "Yeah. Did you see something?" they asked him. The man nodded and said, "You guys are gonna think I'm crazy, but yeah." And he goes on to explain what he saw. He said that he stepped outside for a cigarette on his front porch when he heard knocking. He looked around to see where it was coming from, and when he looked at his neighbor's house, he saw it. There was a black figure standing outside the woman's window, looking into her home. He said that it looked humanoid in stature, but completely made out of a shadow. You could tell it was something solidish, but you couldn't make out any features on it. He stared at it, completely in shock, and watched the thing as it knocked a couple of times, and it darted around the house, knocking on every single window. He said it moved too fast to be human. It was practically a blur. It went around the house a few times, then ran across the road into the tree line, behind one tree in particular. The man was frozen, but he couldn't look away. It then leaned out from behind the tree, staring directly at him with yellow eyes that reflected the light similarly to a cat's. And then it smiled, showing its small but numerous pointed and sharp teeth. I almost shit my pants. He had attempted to joke, but his voice was still shaking. Fast forward to Friday. Stories are being exchanged all over the res about other sightings and experiences people were having. On top of multiple people experiencing the knocking, there were also quite a few sightings with everyone describing the creature in the same way. One woman was bringing her trash bin to the road when she thought she saw someone in her peripheral vision standing near the trees. She walked back up the driveway and into her home, feeling like she was being watched. Right before she was about to open her door to go back inside her home, she looked back and saw two reflective yellow eyes watching her from the trees. She said it was about 5 feet above the ground. Another couple was driving at night, and they saw a humanoid figure standing in the middle of the road. As they got closer, they slowed down, and it turned around to face them. That's when they saw the reflective yellow eyes and the sharp, pointed teeth as it smiled at them. They stopped the car, too afraid to go closer to it, until they decided to just drive past it. Being on a narrow road, they drove past it with the figure being only a few feet from the window, staring at them the whole time. "You still sure you want to go to that party?" my dad asks, but my friends were already pulling into the driveway. I gave my family hugs and kisses goodbye, and they told me to be careful. But I felt fine. The common belief among native people is that negative energy attracts negative energy. Therefore, an evil spirit would be drawn to people with unresolved issues, traumas, and sinners, I suppose. If you're someone who's spiritual, self-aware, and basically a good person, that, in and of itself, will be protective. I get to the party, and within 20 minutes, the conversation shifts towards all the paranormal experiences people have been having. I'm really curious about what everyone has to say, because they have stories I haven't heard yet. But my friend couldn't hold her alcohol very well, and was crying about how she wishes she was closer with her brother. I was trying to make her feel better while listening to everyone's stories. One of the people at the party was related to the neighbor of the woman who was calling the police. The experience really shook him up, and my friend was just explaining everything that he was doing later on. For one, he smudged his entire home, which is something our people do when we're looking for extra protection against paranormal entities. He also went to visit multiple elders around the community, asking for advice and any information they had on similar happenings. What we do know about paranormal experiences on the res is that they don't happen as often as they used to. If you talk to one of our elders, they have endless stories and even more advice to give about how to protect yourself compared to now. One of the explanations that was given to this guy about the shadow thing was that it was evidence that someone was doing an unauthorized shaking tent ceremony. If you don't know what that is, you can look it up, but it's basically like a Ouija board session that takes place inside a tent of some sort, people standing around a tent, while the medicine man or medicine woman goes inside and asks questions. The tent begins to shake, and you can hear the voices of spirits coming through. I've never personally been to one, because we haven't had good enough reason to make one, but typically our ancestors used shaking tent ceremonies while they were starving in the dead of winter and needed some direction on where the nearest food source was. My mom's been to one, and her story is absolutely crazy. She described multiple voices of men and women, only speaking a native tongue, and they were upset that the people were doing a shaking tent ceremony when they weren't on the verge of death. The people there had to explain that they were only doing the ceremony to prove to people that it was real, as we've been losing our culture as a result of residential schools. But the spirits were angry about this, saying that the bridge between the two worlds should never be opened unless absolutely necessary, because you do not know who you're communicating with. It could be evil spirits, and it could be good ones. It could be ancestors, but you never know. Anyways, the elders told him that the spirits crossed over into our world because of a shaking tent ceremony. Someone on the reserve has been doing them without consultation of the elders. So we started thinking about who would do that, without proper guidance and without good enough reason to do so. Then two of the drunkest guys at this point start saying shit like, I'm not scared. That thing could show up now and it couldn't do shit. Basically egging it on. All of us were looking at each other like, why the fuck would you disrespect an evil spirit? That's exactly how you attract it to you. And that's when I decided to leave the sunroom where everyone was hanging out. I went to the living room to console my drunk, crying friend, when I noticed that the rocking chair outside on the porch was going back and forth. I looked away immediately, refusing to make direct eye contact, but I did look at it from my peripheral vision. I'm inside the cottage, and I keep seeing this rocking chair going back and forth, but another thing we're raised to do in our culture is to ignore paranormal experiences. Spirits feed on the energy that people put towards them, so if you freak out, if you get angry, if you yell at it or start crying, that's exactly what it wants, and it will stick around once it gets a reaction. It thrives on energy of any kind. So while I knew something fucked up was happening on the rocking chair, I wasn't about to pay it any attention. 5 minutes or so goes by, and I'm still seeing it moving in the corner of my eye. That's when my friend screams, and she runs to the other side of the sunroom. My other friend sprints to where the girl was sitting and busts through the French doors onto the balcony. All of this happens in a split second, but I immediately go to the patio and ask what's going on. My friend is crying on the couch with friends all around her. She claims to have seen the spirit. She said she was listening to the boys talk about the spirit when she saw one of their faces as he was looking out onto the balcony behind her. She turned around to see what he was looking at, and directly on the other side of the window was the shadow spirit sitting on the rocking chair, smiling at her, literally 3 feet from her. That's when the boys sprinted towards it and bust through the French doors. I walk outside to find the boy, and he's on the lawn, staring into the woods. I call his name, and he looks up at me. All he says is, "Get everyone inside," and the tone of his voice just makes me automatically obey. I get all the drunk teenagers inside the cottage. This is when the phrase, "Come at me, bro," was just gaining popularity, so you can imagine the drunk kids yelling that into the woods. It was terrible. I eventually got everyone inside, and the girl isn't crying anymore, but she's visibly shaken from the experience. The boy comes back inside and tells everyone to clean up, and that we should leave as soon as possible. Everyone has trash bags and are clearing all the beer bottles and cans away. Everyone goes into the cottage, and it's only me and that boy in the sunroom now. I look at him for answers, and all he says is, "It's outside." I nod and start cleaning faster. The sooner we're out of here, the sooner we're away from that thing. As we're cleaning in the sunroom, We hear knocking on the windows in multiple places. The entire sunroom is made of glass, but it's dark out, so you can't even see outside. I immediately looked at the boy, and he just says, "Ignore it." Within 2 seconds, someone comes running out of the bathroom and says, "I'll kill whoever's outside knocking on the bathroom window." But everyone's inside and accounted for. Someone else comes running out of the bedroom saying that there was knocking on the window in there as well. Now everyone's freaking out, and me and the boy and one of our other friends are the only sober ones to calm everyone down. We get the place clean and get outside to the cars immediately. Everyone's getting into the trucks, and I'm standing there with the boy. He's relaxed, but then all of a sudden looks behind me and shoves me into his truck. We peel out of the driveway and drop everyone off. A few days later, I end up hanging out with the boy, and he tells me the story from his perspective. He said that when the boy started talking shit about the spirit, it appeared on the rocking chair behind the girl. He said he made eye contact with it and couldn't look away. They were staring each other down, and that's when the girl saw his expression. He said it was instinct to defend the people he was with and ran towards it. He said that the feeling he was getting from the Kokogi was almost like it was daring him to do something. He said that the second he got up, the Kokogi stood and ran into the woods, disappearing from the patio in a blur. He ran off the porch and was looking around the lawn when he saw it standing at the tree line, looking right at him with a smile on its face. He said the whole time it felt like it was mocking him. It was then that I called his name and it disappeared. He didn't see it again until everyone was getting into the trucks, which explains why he suddenly pushed me inside. He said that it was standing on the far end of the truck, really close to us. Later that night, when he dropped everyone off, they realized that they never locked the door. So he went back to the cottage, but his friend was too scared to go in. The boy goes in by himself, but the second he opens the door, he sees the thing standing in the living room. He locks the door as quick as he can, and they peel out of the driveway. So yeah, sightings continued for a few days after that. We definitely weren't the only people on the res to have experiences like this, and then it stopped all of a sudden. It was the talk of the res. Everyone was curious about what happened to it. Would it come back? What was it, and what not? But word ended up getting around that there were sightings north of our community. White people in the town just north of us were having sightings. The other reservations were having sightings as well. It was like it was traveling north the way the stories were going. Anyway, it's 2018 now, and no one else on my reserve has had any sightings of this particular thing. But yeah, that's my story. This happened when I was a university student. I wasn't a great student, to be honest. Well, not at first. I would often skip classes and just mess around with my friends. There was one girl at college who made me want to go in every now and then, though. I didn't have the guts to ask her on a date at the time this took place, so I had my friend and his girlfriend invite her out with us. It was fine because my friend and his girlfriend were mutual friends. Someone suggested going on a drive at night. My friend and I were really into ghost hunting and stuff like that, so we would often try and find somewhere interesting to test our courage. We had heard a rumor of a place just on the outskirts of town, which was supposed to be haunted. It was this abandoned building down a dark country lane out in the woods. It used to be a high-end lodge that people could rent out, as it had these great views over the lake. That's another reason we chose to go there. Could be kind of romantic at night, right? Also, we had the chance to show the girls we were brave by exploring the abandoned lodge. Rumor had it that one of the rooms inside the lodge was covered in blood spatter, so we went inside, all of us, searching for that room so we could get a photo to show our friends. Well, it turned out that the legend wasn't true. It was just an abandoned building. There was the usual stuff like graffiti, broken glass, and weeds growing all over the place. Besides those things, not much out of the ordinary. We took a walk down close to the lake, but it had gotten far too dark at that point to make out anything. Had it been a full moon, it might have been a bit better. We decided to head back to the car and drive home. I was driving that night, and my friend rode shotgun with me, and the girls were in the back. The girl I was into was sat behind me. Even though we didn't see anything spooky or even get a decent view of the lake, we were all pretty happy with our trip out into the woods. I mean, it was pretty fun to walk around, expecting to be scared. There was tension and excitement. Plus, it was kind of a date, so all those feelings were heightened. It was a nice night. We all wanted to get a drink and some snacks, and someone spotted a convenience store on the way to the abandoned lodge, so we were headed there. Before we could even get off the dirt roads we had traveled down, I spotted something. On the way to the abandoned lodge, we noticed a phone booth, and when we were heading back, I noticed that there was someone stood beside the phone booth. It was a man wearing a business suit. When he saw us approaching, he began to wave one of his hands at us, indicating us to stop. My friend said to me something along the lines of, "Hey, I bet that guy wants us to give him a ride." I replied by telling him there wasn't enough space. I mean, the car was only a 4-seater. I didn't think the girls would want the strangers sat in between them. Either way, I guess that the right thing to do would be to stop and see what he wanted, right? It would look pretty gentlemanly of me to do so, and I would have looked pretty bad if we didn't stop. So I pulled the car to a stop. I already planned on telling him we couldn't give him a ride, but if he wanted, we could call him a taxi or something. The guy wandered over to us, and he stood with one arm on the roof of the car, and one behind his back as he leaned in to speak to me through the crack I made in the window. "Hey guys, glad you stopped. Listen, I got a puncture in my tire and I don't have a phone on me. What do you say? Can you give me a ride?" He was a guy in his late 20s, I would say, maybe early 30s. He looked honest, you know. I didn't see his bike or his car anywhere, but he had a face you could trust. I was considering asking my friend to sit in the back and have this guy sit up front. I would only give him a ride as far as the convenience store. As I was mulling this over and preparing my reply, the girl who I had a crush on in the back starts going crazy, like she's screaming and kicking the chair, then shouts at me. It totally threw me. She shouted at me to drive, hurry up and drive. I did exactly as she said, because I could sense the absolute terror in her voice. So we sped away, leaving the guy who wanted a ride looking puzzled and annoyed. I didn't slow down until she calmed down in the back. The car was full of the sounds of fear, hyperventilation, and confusion. We parked up at the convenience store. Everyone was a little calmer, so we asked what our friend saw. "Didn't you see it?" she said. "The guy had a kitchen knife behind his back. No one goes into the woods with a knife like that." I don't know or want to know what that guy had planned for us with that knife. I don't even know why he was out there with a knife like that in the middle of the night. I do know that we had a close call that night. I was so close to letting that guy in, he would have convinced me. After that night, we stopped going to supposedly haunted places at night. We found out that humans can be way more frightening. This happened when I was 14. I'm 17 at the moment and still linger on the memory. I was home alone that night, as my mom was working an overnight shift and my older brother didn't live at home at the time, so therefore I had the house to myself. I'd say it was maybe 9 or 9:30 p.m., and I was in my room working on homework and listening to music with my headphones in, loud enough to where I really couldn't hear things. I remember for a fact that all of the doors were locked, and I stayed home alone pretty often, so I didn't have a reason to worry. Maybe an hour later, I decided to take my headphones out and take a break from homework. I heard noises in my kitchen and footsteps walking around downstairs, which was odd because my mom wasn't supposed to be home until 7 a.m. the next morning, but she could have taken an early night for whatever reason. But just to make sure, I locked my bedroom door and texted her asking if she came home. It took her around 10 minutes to respond, but when she did, she said no. She was still at work, and why, I asked. At that point, I was freaking out, because my mom and my brother are the only ones with keys to the house, and myself, of course, so I decided to text my brother. Sure enough, he said no. He wasn't in the house. So I told both him and my mother about the situation, and my brother wasn't far from the house, so he said he would be there soon, and to call the cops. As I was trying to find a hiding spot in my room with my phone to call the police, I heard my name called from downstairs. That got me thinking, did whoever was in the house know me personally? Or a friend of the family, maybe? I didn't respond out of fear of who knew my name and was calling it, and I didn't recognize the voice. I called the cops and was on the phone with them, and when my name was called again, followed by, "I know you're up there," and I heard someone start to walk up the stairs. Again, I didn't respond, but I was terrified. The police assured me that they were on their way and to stay put. I was still texting my brother while this was all happening. He informed me that he was 5 minutes away. That's when I heard the front door slam. After I heard the door slam, about 5 minutes later the police arrived and assured me it was them and that I could come out. Shortly after, my brother arrived back home. The police looked around the property and all over the house, but there was no trace of whomever was once here. However, there was damage on the door and lock from being forced open, and it looked to be done by some sort of tool to pick the lock. Everything turned out okay, because nothing was taken, oddly enough. But the upsetting part is whomever was in my house wasn't found. From that night forward, though, we got cameras installed and got a better lock. This didn't happen to me, but it happened to someone who works at my company. He's not the type to share stuff like this online, but I am. So I got his permission. I found it pretty creepy and interesting, and I hope you do too. Back when this took place, he was really into photography. I mean, this guy was really obsessed with it. He needed to get the right camera, the right lens. For the longest time, it was all he spent his money on. It didn't stop there. Every time he took time off of work, he was flying off someplace to take more photos. He would be up early or stay out someplace until the morning light. He loved taking photos of the mountains and the sea at sunrise or sunset. He took photos of wildlife, especially birds, and he favored wide shots of landscapes. After a while, he got tired of taking photos of the same sort of stuff though. Well, it was either that or he couldn't get the time off he wanted from our boss. I think that was what led him to trying to shoot something a bit more locally. He got a new lens or a new camera, I can't remember. He said that he was going to shoot some photos of the stars at night. There was a place not too far away from where he lived. He lived on the outskirts of town beneath the shadow of a mountain. What better place to take some photos of the constellations? It took next to no time for him to get up to the top of the mountain while riding his motorbike. He said that if he went late enough, like he planned on, then he was sure that even the hiking trails would be empty. Riding up those trails would make his journey a lot shorter, but a lot more dangerous. It was illegal, but he thought he would get away with it. There wasn't much of police presence in his town apparently. He knew the area and the risk, so he was confident that he would be up and down without anyone noticing. He said there was a clearing at the top of the mountain where the streetlights were scarce. There was nothing but natural light up there. That's where he wanted to be. Well, he pulled up at the place he wanted to be at and kicked the stand of his bike out. He put it out of sight under a tree, just in case. He took a bunch of photos, tried them from all sorts of angles. He said he was completely immersed in taking his photos since there was a full moon out, and there was a cloudless sky that served as his canvas. His concentration was disrupted when he heard the sound of a vehicle pulling into the observation area parking lot. He had driven up the trail and not up the road. Therefore, he had a kind of aerial advantage over the car that had just pulled into the parking area. At that time of night, he thought it might just be some kids looking for a quiet place to either drink or fool around in, or both. If that wasn't the case, it wouldn't be great if they found a guy on his own, lurking in the bushes with a bunch of camera equipment. Since he didn't know who was going to emerge from the vehicle, he hid in the bushes by the tree where his bike was. Someone pulled in. It stopped in the opposite area of the parking lot. He looked on, expecting a bunch of youngsters to pour out, but only one figure came out of the driver's side door. He wasn't young. He was about the same age as my colleague, if not older. He got out of what my friend now saw was a van, and he started going back and forth with something in his hands. It looked as if he was unloading something. He had 2 armfuls of something, and he headed off into the woods with whatever that was. Then he came back to get more of it from his van. Well, my colleague retracted into the bushes once again after he saw that. He said that he didn't want to be found by that guy. He admitted that he hid in the bushes until the guy in the van completed doing whatever he was doing. That back and forth trip from the van to the woods. Once he heard the van pull away, he came out from under the cover of darkness and left on his motorbike. I was told this story in front of some others. It was on a night out. Some of our senior colleagues were all like, "Wait, what? That's it. It was probably some guy fly tipping, dumping his garbage out in the middle of nowhere." Someone else said, "Yeah, why didn't you call him out on that?" Then someone asked, "What did it look like he was ditching out there anyway? It couldn't have been anything important." Well, I figured that this guy didn't tell us the story for nothing, so I eagerly awaited his response, and he took a deep breath and said, "It wasn't garbage. Whatever it was wrapped in cloth or some kind of clothing," and he hugged it to his chest. He hugged it tight, and he spoke to it. He spoke to it while he walked off into the woods. The mountains at night can hide many things, I guess. He reported what he saw, but he didn't speak another word about what happened that night again. I've never been a big fan of camping. Circa 2012, for some reason or another, my friend and I decided to take a Saturday night to camp on private property on the bank of a small lake in the rural American Southwest. The lake wasn't very large, probably only about 50 to 150 yards across. It was more of a deep pond, but it was 5 times as long as it was wide, and from the perspective of our camp, it consumed the majority of our sightline. The plot of land itself wasn't entirely removed from civilization. We were 5 to 10 miles outside of a small suburb of a mid-sized southern city. It definitely was not easy to access, however, and the only way in was a gated, narrow dirt road across a levee, which spanned one side of the lake. This road was gated and locked. The owner gave us his code. We pulled the car through and locked the gate behind us. If you've ever been down south, you know how quickly it gets isolated outside of cities. Our cities are small, and the rural people around often live rough and wild. We have dense woods, so thick that they're not worth building in unless you have some connection or attachment to the area. I've heard it was not profitable to cut roads through a lot of it when they were building highways in the 50s, so not much development has happened in the last 100 years, and in some places since the Civil War. It's not uncommon to go for a 30-minute drive straight out of town and come upon cabins that are obviously off the grid. My friend and I were used to living in the suburbs, so we were just happy to see the stars and to hear the sounds of nature. We were at our very utilitarian camp, simply looking around and enjoying the night, when suddenly my buddy sat up real straight. He said something like, "Do you see that guy over there?" He pointed to the other side of the small lake. I didn't see anything. I sat up slightly and said, "Nah, it's just the dark playing tricks on you." He seemed actually shaken. "No, look, there's a bunch of faces behind the trees now." That got my attention, and I sat up fully, rubbing my eyes to try to gain focus. And then I saw them. Small, round, white faces stared back at me from across the lake. Maybe 15 to 20 of them. All were positioned in such a way that their bodies were behind the trees, and only their heads were visible. The best way I can describe the faces is like very pale, somehow internally illuminated children. I should mention that neither of us were drinking or high. We were too young for that, not for at least a few more years. We'd eaten dinner at home and were just planning on going to sleep after chilling out for a while. The faces weren't moving. I was kind of sitting there in shock, thinking that my eyes would adjust and I would see that they were a reflection, bugs or owls or something. But I would never come to that realization. I stared right back at them for what felt like 5 minutes, looked back at my friend, and then they were gone. Bodies of water carry sound extremely well, and we heard extensive shuffling from the other side of the lake, and a couple of small branches snap. It's incredible what your ears pick up on during an otherwise silent night. My buddy was tearing up a little when he said, "What the hell were those?" And I didn't have a good answer. Neither of us slept particularly well. I definitely felt validated in my feelings of disliking camping, but what were we going to do? I tried to do some research on the internet, but never found a phenomenon that could explain that. This happened a couple of years ago. I was walking my dog Indy in my local field. It was dark, but it wasn't late. It was wintertime in the UK, so it was maybe 6 p.m. The field is mainly used for rugby and football, but it's completely free to walk through whenever. It's also surrounded by houses and streetlights on the roads, but the field itself is dark. So I had brought a torch with me, mainly so I didn't step in any dog shit. I've come in one entrance of the field, and I'm following a path that leads to another. I used the field to make a loop back around onto the road and back to my house, giving my dog some off-lead time whilst in the field. Anyway, as I'm walking up the field, I notice a figure in the entrance I was going to use to leave. I keep my eye on this figure as they have very dark clothing on and their hood up. I'm shining my torch as I'm walking, so I know the person knows I'm there as it's very obvious. At first, I wasn't nervous, more so just being vigilant. Indy is a wonderful German Shepherd, so as you can imagine, I feel pretty safe with her. It wasn't until I saw the person duck down behind a bush that I absolutely froze. I was about 200 feet from the exit, but would have to walk past the bush they hid behind to get to it. I call Indy over and get her back on the lead so she's close. By this point, she's also hyper alert due to the person behind the bush. With that, I hear a weird, high-pitched voice that sounded like they were saying my dog's name. They said it 3 or 4 times in this longed-out, high-pitched voice. It's clearly coming from the person hiding. Luckily, Indy wasn't reacting to it, as it probably barely sounded like her name to her. I had a moment of, shall I fight or flight? Either I 1, run past the bush and try for the exit. 2, turn around and run back into the dark field and make for the other exit. Or 3, confront this fuck. Indy at this point is hackles up, ears up, and very alert in front of me, all whilst still maintaining a wonderful sense of calm. I went with number 3. I confronted him. I mustered up every bit of courage and confidence I had and shouted at the top of my voice, "What the fuck are you doing?" The hooded man came out from the bushes very quickly without saying anything, and I said the same thing again. "What the fuck are you doing trying to scare a young woman?" He started to stutter and said, "Oh, I thought he was someone I knew." I answered back and said, "Who hides from someone they think they know in a dark field?" After that, he apologized a couple of times and continued to skulk down the rest of the field, and I made for a swift exit with Indy. God knows what his intentions were. Maybe he thought I had a smaller dog and was going to try to attack me. Maybe he saw Indy and realized, no chance. Or maybe he really did think I was someone he knew. Whatever it was weird and scary. A decade ago, one of my neighbors disappeared. Since he was an old man and I did not meet him very often, I didn't know that he was missing. One night I fell asleep and had the weirdest dream. I was in a hospital room. There was a corpse, a huge corpse, that was covered with a white sheet. There was also a TV, and a woman on the TV screen started to talk about a murder. Suddenly, I saw blood appearing on this white sheet, like the corpse was bleeding. I left that room with this heavy feeling of sadness. I was walking on the street and checked my pockets. I didn't have any money, and that made me even more unhappy. I ended up in a neighborhood that I knew well. Then someone that I could not see started to torture me. I remember clearly everything that happened. My murderer cut my legs with an axe. He also burned my skin with a cigarette. I was so frustrated There was this old man that looked at the whole scene but did not move a finger. I saw the exact place where my invisible murderer lived. Then I woke up crying. That was such a vivid dream. I told my mom about the dream, and a couple of hours she went out for shopping. When she came back, she told me that my neighbor was found dead in the same exact circumstances that I saw in my dream. I really tried to talk to his wife and the police, but they would not listen to me. I know where this monster lives. I don't know what he looks like, but I know his place. The police did not find him. It happened almost 10 years ago. I feel responsible and sad, really sad. I believe that his spirit reached out to me in that dream. He wanted his truth to be told. I'm really heartbroken. I live in Europe, and police don't believe in mediums or paranormal experiences. I shared this because someone asked me for more paranormal experiences, and this is one of the few I've had. This happened a few weeks ago, and it was so bizarre that I still think about it every so often. Anyway, I was babysitting my nieces since my sister was going out to meet this other girl at a coffee shop. I offered to babysit them since her house was nice, and I didn't have anything else to do that night. So I decided, why not? At first, we just watched movies and played video games together. Later on into the night, I noticed they didn't eat anything, and so I asked them if they were hungry. They both replied, no, at first. That's when I said I can make a quesadilla for them or anything else they want. They still replied no. When I mentioned pizza, they immediately yelled yes. Of course they would. Well, bad idea that night. When I called the local Pizza Hut, I ordered 2 large pizzas to be delivered. Keep in mind that I went outside to make this phone call. Quite loudly, I should say, because it was dead silent outside. I only went outside because I noticed a bag on the street, and I thought it was mine or somebody else's. It was just trash when I looked closely at it. I'm assuming this was the neighbor's trash bag. 20 minutes go by and I hear the doorbell ring. It was the Pizza Hut delivery girl. I paid her in cash and I took the pizzas to the kitchen where my nieces were eating at. This is when the weird stuff happens. Not even 10 minutes go by and I hear the doorbell ring again. I was skeptical at first and looked out the window. It was hard to see much of anything by this point. I opened the door only to be greeted by an old man with a pizza box in his hand. He says to me, "Hello, son. I got your pizzas that you ordered." I tried to answer in a way that would divert the situation. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't order any pizza. You must have gotten the wrong location." That's when I tried to close the door, but he pushed his hand hard on it and said, "Are you sure?" I firmly replied back, "Yes," and I closed the door. I thought that was the end of that, until one of my nieces told me, "Why is there a man just standing outside our house?" I was confused, but my heart started to pound when I thought it was the same old man from earlier. I was right. It was the same old man still standing outside the house, with the pizza box still in his hand. I was absolutely livid. I furiously opened the door and yelled at him that I would call the cops immediately. He ran off. My sister arrived 2 hours later, and I told her what happened. She looked immediately concerned, and then asked who it was. I told her it was an old man who impersonated a pizza delivery worker. I don't know what she did after I told her. I'm not sure if she called the cops to file a report or not.